Namaskar and a very warm welcome to everyone joined in today on our week 73 Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk. This talk is being organized by the Central Zoo in New Delhi as part of the ongoing Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The Mahotsav is a 75-week-long celebration to commemorate 75 years of India's independence, which falls on the 15th of August 2022. The Central Zoo Authority is taking this celebration forward through a massive outreach campaign entitled Conservation to Coexistence, the People Connect. Under the helm of this campaign, we will be showcasing 75 conservation priority species and 75 zoos, highlighting one species and one zoo each week. We're currently in week 73 of this celebration with the vultures, that is the chip species, as the species in focus, and the Vulture Conservation Breeding Center, Pinjore, as the zoo in focus. So joining today to speak to us on the species is Mr. Devendra Dhadwal, who is a Divisional Forest Officer with the Himachal Pradesh Forest Department. Mr. Dhadwal is presently serving as the Assistant Project Director KFW in the project Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh and has been working for spreading awareness about wildlife species, their habitat management and conflict resolution for more than 2 decades. He has also written 5 books on birds of birds in Pong Lake and Himachal Pradesh. And he has also been coordinating different states regarding the vulture conservation since 2003. So he will speak to us today more on the species in focus. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Andati. Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you and the presentation. If you can just start with the beginning slide. I think we're on the second slide. Yes.
Okay, good afternoon to all. And I would like to extend my gratitude to CJ for providing me this opportunity to talk about the Vulture in situ conservation program. So, looking at the time constraint, I will straightway go to the vultures. So, in India, we have 9 species of vultures. Some of them are resident and some are migratory species. So if you see on the extreme left, this is white-rumped vulture, Gyps bengalensis. And if you see IUCN Red Data book, it is critically endangered. And its status in Wildlife Act is also Schedule 1. That means it is given highest protection as per the Wildlife Act of 1972. And the extreme left, this is Griffon vulture. This is winter migrant and least concern as per IUCN. And the middle one, if you see the black one, this is Nereus vulture. It is also winter migrant. And as per IUCN, it is near threatened species in India. On the extreme right, this is the bearded vulture and lammergeier. It is a habitat specialist species confined to high altitude areas. And this is also near threatened as per IUCN species. About other species, I will come in during the subsequent slides. But if we see vulture as a whole, vultures are, seems to be ugly and, not as loving as we talk about other birds. Mythologically, if we see, then we all know about Garuda, that is uh, that is known there when he tried to save Mata Sita from the clutches of Ravana when Ravana was trying to abduct. So we will find few mentions in literature about vultures, but not much. And if we see historical trend, if in early 80s, the population of vulture species was estimated roughly 40 million, and its population crashed to roughly around 19,000. So there is a huge decline of the population across species. And if you look into the role of these species, the dramatic vulture decline observed across India present a range of ecological threats, and that threats by influencing the numbers and distribution of other squamine species. And not only that, the increased feral dog populations have been reported all over in India, posing many associated diseases, risks such as rabies to human and even to wildlife. Similarly, increased crow population at carcass sites near settlement areas pose a risk of infections to poultry, other domestic birds, and humans. And likewise, prevalence and concentration of diclofenac residues in ungulates carcasses is important for India's threatened vulture populations. Even a small portion of, less than 0.8% of ungulate carcasses containing this lethal level of diclofenac is enough to cause the observed rapid decline in the population. So even it has socio-cultural influence to humans. If we talk about Parsis, they are putting their bodies, dead bodies, and the vultures are feeding. And once it is fed upon the dead body, it is believed that the soul is liberated to ascend to the heavens. So if we talk about breeding quickly, so these vultures are breeding in different locations of the country, right from Himalayas, foothills, mainland India. So there are different breeding locations in right, like in Jammu Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, even in foothills across up to Assam and further, and south up to Karnataka, and few population is also reported from Kerala. So meaning thereby these different species of vultures, they are breeding in different locations of the country, and we need to map those breeding locations. Although the in stable population, the breeding success is very low, and the breeding success varies from zero point 0.5 to 1 fledgling per pair per year, and the survival percent is up to 20%. That itself is a additional challenge to ensure its viable population in the forest. If you look into the historical trend of the decline in vulture population, right from early 93 till 2007 or so, BNHS, that is Bombay Nature Research Society, has done opportunistic count across length and breadth of the country. And they came up with the figure that if we talk about these three chip species, that is of Indian origin, Indian vulture, that is Gyps indicus, long-billed vulture, that's Gyps tenuistris, and white-rumped vulture, that is Gyps bengalensis. Their combined population decline was more than 97% in this period of time. And if we talk about Gyps bengalensis only, that is white-rumped vulture only, its population has crashed more than 99.7%. So this is the huge crash of the species in mainland India, and that's why collective efforts are required, may it be in situ conservation program or ex situ conservation program. So, in situ conservation program, if we look at broadly, it is very important to save habitats and ensure quality food. So, habitats, initially, we need to understand the habitats roosting points where the birds are roosting, and the breeding points where there we have breeding colonies, and breeding colonies varies from habitat to habitat in terms of, like, some species are breeding on tall trees, and some species are breeding on cliffs, and others on tall buildings. So we have to look and map these habitats. We are doing it across India so that we can understand their roosting points, breeding points, and feeding points initially. In India, the food is not an issue, but ensuring quality food for vulture is an issue. So for that, we need to know about the prevalence of NSAIDs, that is non-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory drugs prevalent in the system. Mainly the diclofenac drug, which is has been banned by the Drug Controller of India in the year 2006, but human vials are still there. Accordingly, other NSAID drugs, if they are prevalent, so we need to ensure that they are not there in the system so that vulture can have a quality food to survive in the future. So it's very important to save habitat and ensure food quality for the vultures. Roosting and breeding points, as I told you that they are breeding. Sometimes if we talk about high altitude hills and talk about gyps species like white-rumped vulture, that is Gyps bengalensis, it is breeding mainly on chill trees, that is Pinus roxburghi. But if you go to mainland, middle India, central India, then these species are also like Gyps indicus and these species are also breeding on the cliffs and old buildings. So these are wide range of habitats where we need to, map, not only map them, but protect them in future. So these are the broadly breeding points for these species in forest areas. So quickly, since we have vast area, we have to, on foot travel across length and breadth of the forest, which is humanly very challenging. So we need to understand their breeding and roosting habitats. And once we can understand them, so we need to map those habitats. Like if we talk about this Gyps bengalensis, that is white-rumped vulture, it is breeding on Pinus roxburghi, that is cheal trees in hilly areas. And likewise, on tall trees in central India, in South India, and in eastern India, it is breeding on the long trees. So we need to map those habitat instead of going through the different forest areas. So that is the way to shorten or short down the potential habitat mapping approach. So in addition to that, we are also doing to get information from shepherds because they are moving inside the deep forest. We are also trying to get information from other hunters, nomadic guzzers, resin tapping. They are doing in case of this pine trees, and then timber lot labor is also going mainly during summer season, so they can also give you a lot of information. And the local people around those nesting areas and breeding areas. So these kind of information can be gathered, and we are gathering it, and then that will help us in adopting the methodology and reducing the potential roosting and habitat roosting points and breeding points and feeding points. So we are also trying to, collect the data in terms of number of birds in the field, mainly the breeding pairs in the wild conditions. And we are also trying to collect data from the feeding points where the population estimation can be done later on in future. So we have devised a performer for field functionaries, which we are sharing across whenever is required by the forest managers. So we are also doing transit roadside and on foot as and when required, and additional information whatever is required. We are also doing it. There are many challenges looking at the limitation of the time. I will not go in detail, but nesting is mainly in fire prone areas during summer season. So these birds, vultures are very sensitive to fire. I will give you one slide later on where birds have totally left the area to breed, and also whenever there is a fire, so priority is to save the forest. That is, inbuilt by default priority to is with the field functionary that we have to save the forest. But if we have hand-in information about the roosting or breeding points of these species, we can share with the field functionaries, and then whenever there is a fire, those frontline staff can, on priority basis, can protect those breeding locations first, rather than in general forest and bushes. So that is the priority. We are trying to prioritize these areas with the field functionaries. Just a example that what we Himachal government has done in district Kangra, Himachal Pradesh. So district Kangra, I think it is, to my information, is the richest in terms of breeding of white-rumped vulture in the entire southern Asia. We have over 400 plus nest where this Gyps bengalensis species breeding, and more than 99% of the nests are on this Pinus roxburghi trees. So we started way back in the year 2003-4, and number of the nest has gone up to 400 plus. So main reason besides and said drugs, summer fire, we have seen it is one of the main reason where breeding colonies have been destroyed, and vultures are not returning those breeding colonies after there's a forest fire. So it is very sensitive to forest fires. And then we also have seen that they are dried and dead trees standing in the middle of the forest. So there's a practice of marking those trees for timber. So we have, or we are trying to stop these felling of these dead and dried trees in the forest, because these vultures are using these trees for sometimes for nesting also, and mainly for surveillance across. So it is important to save such trees also. Other reasons, unscaled carcasses are there, decline of village cobblers. We are also trying to map these village traditional cobblers to de-skin the carcass in the dumping points. So which is missing, which otherwise was de-linked. So we are trying to link it with the vulture conservation programs in different states. So, dumping of carcass in forested areas, we need further, study about this, how it is impacting the vulture distribution and population. Poisoning is another which is happening, not mainly in India, but still there are, instances where we have seen that poisoning of vulture is happening, which is another reason. Then there sometimes there dead animal across railway lines, and there it is causing mortality of many vulture species whenever there is a train running across lines. So immediately, what actions we need? Vulture feeding point we are having at different locations, mainly in Himachal. I will not call it as a vulture restaurant. Idea of vulture feeding point is not to provide food, but just to keep the stray dogs away, feral dogs away from feeding points. But these feeding points should be big enough where vultures, since these are big birds and fly with the thermal, so they need open area to fly. So vulture feeding point has to be there with at least minimum 2 hectare area where we can put the carcass, and vulture can feed it. So even it can, these points can be used for monitoring of vultures. If some scientists or researcher want to closely monitor vulture population or their feeding ecology, they can use these points. So that's there. Then another is we are also doing undercover survey to know the prevalence of these NSAID drugs, if they are there or not. But in hilly areas, though it has been banned in the year 2006, but they are not prevalent now. There are hardly any, instance or uh, evidence where we can say they are prevalent. And strictly, we have to say no to resin tapping and timber extraction, because resin tapping is going on with the pine trees, which is a economy to the state, economy to the local people also, and timber extraction as well. So, which is a big challenge because it is connected with the economy of local people as well. But if you really want to save these vultures, mainly with the breeding colonies, we have to strictly say no to resin tapping and timber extraction around these breeding points, and which we are doing, which we could do in some areas with the help of the senior forest officers and with the support of the concerned state governments. So, like in Himachal Pradesh, if we talk about white-rumped vulture, Gyps bengalensis, this is the highest breeding population in the entire country. And at present, we have over 400 nests, which are spread in mainly in district Kangra. And almost 40 active sites are there where birds are breeding. If we go through this slide, deliberately I put it just to sensitize about the impact of the forest fire on the breeding colonies of these vultures. If you see in the year 2005 and 6, there were nests around these sites, and by the year 2010 and 11, in the year 2009 and 10, there was forest fire during summer in these nest colonies. And from 2000 onward till 2022, there's no nesting. Means the birds haven't returned and they are so sensitive to these forest fires. So we have to ensure the protection of these breeding colonies. We are trying to do it by employing, forest watchers during summer season, because their breeding time, mainly the fledgling stage, is this April, May, June, is coinciding with the summer season. That is the time when forest fire is taking place. So we have to strictly ensure the protection of at least the breeding points. So, which one few gaps which I could see, the ex situ conservation has its own importance. In situ, it's an home to whatever intervention, management interventions at all levels we will do. Ultimately, the species will come to, the forest, and we have to ensure, the safe zone for these vulture species. So there is a action plan for vulture conservation in India 2020 to 2025, but there's not much focus on in situ conservation programs. So we need to focus, give more space whenever we talk action plans at pan India level. So more focus in situ conservation program is also required. So we need to see to it in future that we have to give importance to it. If we see the published data, unfortunately, there's not much data when we talk about, breeding of these species in its natural habitat, that is forest. But there are a lot of information about ex situ conservation programs. So we have to collectively do and, collect the data regarding its, right from its population dynamics to breeding and growth and all. So we have to share it and publish it. Then we are also talking about vulture safe zones. Vulture safe zones up to 100 kilometer from the center, and core zone is extended up to 50 kilometer. But if we look at different locations in India where these vultures are breeding in wild and their number is huge, but those areas are out of these vulture safe zones. So we have to revisit the philosophy of these vulture safe zones whenever it is possible, so that we can include these breeding natural breeding points, because which is very important. Unless we protect these breeding points, it will be a big challenge to conserve and protect these species at a pan India level. Then comes nesting sites. There are nesting sites in different parts of the country, right from North India to Madhya Pradesh to South India to Assam to Western India. So these nesting points, if we can declare them conservation reserves in future under wildlife, there's a provision under the Wildlife Act 1972. Then we will have a legal backing to protect not only the species but the habitat. So there should be an effort. We are also doing effort to conserve, declare these reserves as conservation reserves. When we talk about national level coordination, which is also missing, whenever we are doing, in different parts of the country, small interventions in terms of habitat improvement, in terms of collecting data of population dynamics, it is not coordinated. So some agency like maybe CJD or some other agency has to come up so that we can coordinate in situ conservation efforts at national level. Then more focus on in situ conservation to ensure future viable population, because whatever we will get from ex situ conservation programs also, ultimately it has to be released back into in the forest areas. So we have to take care of the forest area in terms of habitat protection, in terms of in keeping it free from harmful those drugs, for example diclofenac and others. And we also need a coordinated effort with the managers and the scientific communities for better management, future management of the species. So looking at the time constraint, I think we should stop it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving a comprehensive overview of the vultures and the conservation being done in Himachal Pradesh, along with the gaps that are present prevalent. We now move on to the second part of today's talk, which is on Know Your Zoo. So joined in today to speak to us is Dr. Vibhu Prakash, who is the officer in charge of the Vulture Conservation and Breeding Center, Pinjore. So Dr. Vibhu has studied the raptor community at Keoladeo National Park, Bharatpur, for his doctoral thesis, and has since continued work on raptors. He has been instrumental in the research pertaining to determining the causes of decline in vulture population in India, and has been part of the team that has also prepared the South Asian Vulture Recovery Program, which includes establishing and running vulture conservation breeding centers across India. He has also received various accolades throughout his more than 3 decade long career, and he will speak to us today more on the Vulture Conservation Breeding Center at Pinjore. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Arundhati, for this nice introduction. I'll just share my presentation and sorry, I'll just go to my first slide. Yes, thank you so much. And I'm really grateful to CZA and to Arundhati to giving me opportunity to talk on Vulture Conservation Breeding Center Pinjore. But before I do that, I will like to share a bit more on vultures and why we needed a vulture conservation breeding program. So I am from Bombay Natural Society, and we have this conservation breeding center at Pinjore, which is being run in collaboration with Harayan Forest Department. And of course, we are the coordinating zoo of Central Zoo Authority. So we do everything under CZA. So we are now focusing on three critically endangered species: the long-billed vulture, slender-billed vulture, oriental whiteback, all the white-rumped vulture. So before that, I would like to tell you a little bit about vultures. Vultures are raptors, but over thousands of years, they have not been hunting, so they have been scavenging. So now they have evolved for scavenging. So since they have evolved for scavenging, they can eat almost 40 to 50% of the body weight in one go, whereas other vertebrates can only eat about 5% in one meal. And these vultures, once they have gassed themselves, they can go hungry for 15, 20 days without any problem. And they're so efficient scavengers. Especially the gyps vultures, they are obligate scavengers. They don't ever hunt. They only look for dead meat, and they eat the same kind of meat like tigers, leopards, and hyenas and all that, but they eat only dead meat. But these vultures are much more efficient than the mammalian predators or scavengers because they are highly mobile. They are highly mobile and very social because they are big birds, but once they fly and get into the thermals, they can be in the air for hours. And when they are flying, they look at each other and also at the predators and scavengers on the ground. And if they are moving towards one direction, so a vulture will come down, but it will not come down, but it will take small closed circuits and then keep circling, and if he spots a carcass, it will still keep circling and thereby advertise to the other vultures flying in the sky that come, there's food. So vultures from hundreds of kilometers can come on their carcass and finish it within minutes. And vultures are social birds, so there is no hierarchy. Hungry bird is more dominant, and they are very fast feeders. They have a long muscular tongue, which has central depression, so they can actually slurp meat because they have to compete with the other predators. And they can travel over 100 kilometers an hour, then they go long distances, but they are always in flock because that helps them in food search. And when we talk about vultures, especially the gyp species, this typical vulture with long neck and big body and all, they were very common in our country. We had an estimate of 4 crore vultures in the country, and it's very difficult to imagine now how common they used to be. This is a picture taken by my friend Gautam Narayan, who used to work on Bird Hazard Project of Bombay Natural Society. If you see this picture, every inch of space is occupied by vultures, even the top of the water tank, everywhere. And this is a slaughterhouse waste dump, and you will see there's so many vultures. And surprisingly, wherever vultures are there, and they do such an efficient job that there's no smell, or it's because smell is or odor is bacterial action on organic things and all. But when vultures are there, they eat up everything because they have evolved for scavenging. But now And vulture crash has also told us how important it is to monitor common birds, because when vultures are very common, very few people were actually monitoring. Fortunately, Bombay Natural History Society was monitoring raptor and bird population across the country, and we were monitoring in Kevaladari National Park. Because when a bird which is very common, we have a 4 crore vultures, and even when we lose 50% of them, they're still 2 crores, a big number. Even 1,000 vultures are a big number. And unless you are monitoring and counting them regularly, you will never know what's happening to the population. And that's what happened. So in Kevaladari National Park, we noticed that in early 80s, there were good number of breeding pairs. This is all breeding pairs. And by mid 90s, very few were left. And by 2000, absolutely nothing was left. So we knew that something serious was happening. And similarly, BNHS carries out vulture census surveys across the country once in 4 years. And based on these nationwide surveys, we knew that the population of vultures crashed across the country. And we had lost over 97% by 2000, and by 99 by 2007 we had lost 99.9% of the vulture population, especially the white-backed vulture. But since then, a lot of conservation measures were taken, and by 2012, the Gyps bengalensis, that the white-rumped or white vulture back population, had stopped declining. It was increasing a bit, but the population was very low, so there was no chance of complacency. And long-billed vulture population was still declining, but at a very slow rate. So that was a solace. And when vultures were there, you will never come across this situation. This is all the white stuff you see is the maggots. Now vultures are not there, the carcass rot. And this is how you see the maggot. But what you don't see is the bacteria and fungus which multiply in millions. They form spores, go into the soil, and once bacteria and fungus has formed spores, they become immortal. But vultures will feed on these carcasses because they can form spores and spread diseases. So vultures are absolutely important for human and animal health. And since the vultures are declining, the population of dogs, the free-ranging dogs, have also gone up. And it is because when vultures were there, whenever a carcass is thrown out in the open, the vultures will come in hundreds, cover the carcass, and dogs will have no chance of getting it in. But now there are few vultures, more dogs. Dogs get to eat a lot of food, and dogs are also cannibals. So usually they will litter at isolated places where other dogs cannot get. But now, since food is there, you will have pups in the rib cage of cattle at the carcass dumps, and these pups, when they grow up, they are ferocious. They attack humans as well as wildlife. And dogs carry all kind of disease. Rabies is one of them, which is deadly, which has no cure. So because of the vulture decline, human health and animal health has really suffered. So when we noticed that the vultures were declining. We tried to find out what is happening to the vultures. So we saw vultures, some of the vultures sitting with their drooping necks, and once this symptom appear, and vultures will go weak gradually, and they will die in 10 to 15 days. So we thought maybe our disease is killing them. So whenever a vulture died, we will pick it up and we'll open it up, and we'll find that this vulture has a lot of uric acid deposit on the visceral organ, which the veterinarians told us that it is visceral gout and it happens because of renal failure. But why this was happening, we were not very sure. And we also looked at food availability, the habitat availability, and the impact of pesticide use. But we found that nothing was a problem. Food was abundant, habitat was no issue, because vultures can nest from they usually nest on the tallest tree. If they are in Rajasthan, they will not on a khijadi tree, but if they are in an evergreen forest, they will nest on the tallest tree. So that's not a problem. And even on off-stop, the trees are not there. So habitat was not a problem. Food was not a problem. We looked at pesticides in their tissues. We did found pesticide residues, but not even enough to cause breeding failure. So it was clear that that was not killing them. So that then what happened, that there were American scientists who were working in Pakistan, and they had very similar results, that vultures were dying, and most of the vultures were dying of visceral gout. So what they did, they fed vultures, they had captive vultures, so they fed vultures orally on diclofenac and then through buffalo meat, and they got the same result. The buffalo vultures died of visceral gout. So it was a very clear indication that diclofenac is is indeed killing. Diclofenac is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug which is given to cattle for pain and inflammation. It's very useful for humans as well as for cattle, and it gives relief in 15 minutes. But unfortunately, is very toxic to vultures, as toxic as cyanide is to humans. So once it was found in Pakistan that the diclofenac is killing vultures, we looked at our tissue samples in India. So we found that 76% of our vultures had died of visceral gout. And all the vultures which had died of visceral gout also has residues of diclofenac. So it was very clear that diclofenac was indeed killing vultures. And when we looked at prevalence of diclofenac, it's almost all over. And so fortunately for us, when we told Government of India that vultures have declined, we have lost 99% of the vultures and they're dying of diclofenac, they moved very quickly, formed a major vulture action plan in 2006. And the action plan gave us three important guidelines for working on vulture conservation. One was to identify a safe alternative to diclofenac, because diclofenac was an extremely good drug for cattle, and we have a big cattle industry. So the Ministry of Agriculture said that unless we have an alternative to diclofenac, it will be difficult to ban it. So we looked for an alternative to diclofenac. Then a ban on veterinary use of diclofenac was obviously required to save the vultures from getting extinct. Then we also thought that unless we do some active interventions, have a conservation breeding program, the vultures might go extinct. Although conservation breeding program is not best of conservation options, but you have to do this if the situation requires. In US, California and Congo exist because of the conservation program. Mauritius, Seychelles exists because of the conservation program, and they have not even removed the cause of mortality. But still, now for California and Congo, only 21 vultures remained in the wild, but now they have over 450 vultures, both in wild and captivity. So we looked for a safe drug for vultures, and we found there's a drug called meloxicam, which is used across the globe in zoos and all for treating vultures and raptors, and they have never caused mortality. So we suggested that meloxicam could be a safe drug for vultures. So Indian Veterinary Research Institute did safety testing of meloxicam at Vulture Center in Pinjore, and they found that it was safe. When there is a toxicity of NSAIDs, the uric acid levels in the blood really shoot up. So when you give diclofenac, the uric acid shoots up, but when meloxicam is given, nothing happens. And meloxicam is a second generation drug, very few side effects. Only downside it is slow acting. It gives you relief in 4 to 5 hours, and it is not antibiotic. But nevertheless, is safe, and we recommended this to Government of India. Government of India promptly in 2006 banned diclofenac for veterinary use and suggested that meloxicam should be used instead. But soon we found out that the vultures were still dying, and that was because of the misuse of multi-dose vials of human use for human formulation, which were being used on cattle. You just required a 3 ml vial as a dose for humans. And fortunately, Government of India has now restricted the vial size of human formulation of diclofenac only to 3 ml. And this has really brought down the use of diclofenac in veterinary use. So conservation breeding program was an important recommendation of action plan of Government of India. So conservation breeding was started in 2004, and by 2006 we had 8 different conservation breeding centers in the country, and these are all coordinated by Central Zoo Authority. Pinjore is the coordinating zoo. And when you think of conservation breeding, it's very easy to breed vultures also if you give them the right condition and all. But the immediate question was how many you should breed. You should breed such numbers that when they are released in wild, they could play their conservation role, and they should be genetically viable and self-sustaining population. So we did a mathematical modeling and came out with a figure that if we can release 600 pairs of each of the 3 species in wild, they will form a viable population. So to get 300 pairs, 600 pairs, we thought that we'll have 25 pairs of each of the 3 species in 6 different centers. And from each centers, we'll produce 100 pairs and release in the wild. So just not to put all the eggs in one basket. So first release was initiated in 2020 because, we collected young birds, and it took them 5 to 6 years or 6 years to start breeding. And then, as you know, vultures lay only 1 egg. So first generation we kept with us, and then second generation we will now start releasing back in the wild. So this is a typical layout of Vulture Conservation Breeding Center. This is in Pinjore, which is about 30 kilometers north of Chandigarh on Shimla Highway. And we have various aviaries for various purposes. It is spreads on 5 acres of land. So because we keep birds, we are very alert to disease outbreak, because if there's a disease outbreak, it could have serious implications. So we have a very good quarantine facility, which is about 10 kilometers away from the center. So when we bring in the vultures, they go to the quarantine facility, we do a health check and keep them for 45 days. That is the longest incubation period of any known disease. That is the Ranicate disease. And if any problem is there, it will appear in 45 days. So we keep them there and then bring them to the center. And if they are young birds or juvenile nestlings, we keep them in nursery aviary, or if they are more than 1 year old, which are flighted birds, big birds, so we keep them in holding aviaries, which are 20 by 20 into 16. This is our biggest aviary, called the colony aviary, which is 100 feet long, 40 feet wide, and 20 feet high. And here we keep vultures in a flock of 30 to 35 birds. As you know, vultures are social birds. They have to be kept in groups, otherwise they will not be successful. And we have given them all the facilities to breed. And they have nesting ledges. The flooring is all sand. We have water troughs. On the top, is quite open except for a layer of netlon, which is a soft netting that even with water hit it, it will not get hurt. But on the top, we have a welded iron mesh, and we have big windows for ventilation. And for big birds kept in captivity, the major problem is that in wild they are flying for 60% of the time, but in captivity they will be perched. So they can develop pressure sores on the foot. So we provide them rough surface to perch on, so they don't get that. And we give them food from food hatch and nesting material from nesting hatch. We kind of condition them to the uh, captive conditions. So we have other aviaries, hospital aviary. If a bird gets sick in the center, we keep them there. We have breeding aviaries to keep individual pair of vultures if they are not comfortable in colony aviary situation. But we don't think that breeding aviaries are very good now. We breed vultures in colony aviaries. We do have display aviary because our all facilities are off display, and where people do come and they want to see vultures, so we have kept them in display aviary, which are not used for breeding program, and people can come and see them there and go back. We have marked all our vultures with a wing tag, with length band, and we also microchip them, and we keep all their morphometrics. Everything is electronically stored. So we know which bird is with whom and what is their age and all that. And we have developed good laboratory facilities in the center, like we can do blood work, hematology, biochemistry, and vultures are not sexually dimorphic. You cannot differentiate from a male from a female. So we take the help of DNA. So we do molecular sexing for these birds, and we have a small lab for that. And also we do microbiology study of the gut contents. And we feed vultures either on goat or buffaloes. In Pinjore, it is only on buffalo. When on goats, sorry. And goats we keep for 10 days, because if they have been treated with diclofenac, it will be excreted out within 72 hours, and there will no problem. If diclofenac is there, if we don't take that precaution, we can kill our flock of vultures. And you will see from here, there is no fight. Vultures are social birds. They let the hungry bird feed first, and then the bird which is feeding gives way. And they do feed very fast. They get 4 kilos of meat per week, and on 2 different feeding days. We don't feed them every day because vultures don't need to feed every day, because they don't get food every day. So we try to mimic wild conditions. And we top the water troughs every day. And if you don't top it up, they don't take bath. They love to take bath in flowing water. And this is what we have learned over the years. Earlier, we would not top of the water, and vultures would not take bath. But now you see, they take thorough bath, especially after the meal or when there is good sunshine. And you will notice here, there is no fight. It's almost one by one, and they take very thorough bath in that. You see how they really drench themselves. And since they are social bird, all activities are synchronized. If they are bathing together, feeding, and if they are sunning, this is what they do when there is bright sunshine. This is more to shed ectoparasites and for thermoregulation. All of them doing the same activity. And when there is a good gush of wind, these vultures want to do wing exercise. And if they do this wing flap and jump exercise, they can keep their pectoral muscles in very good shape. And all the birds in the aviary will do the same thing because they have to synchronize their activity. They are social birds, and this helps them in food finding. All our aviaries also had trees earlier, but their excreta is so acidic that they kill all the trees. But see how vigorous wing exercise they do. If they can do this kind of wing exercise, once you release them, they will fly very easily. There's no problem. And when these birds are about 3 years old, they start pair formation. The male offers a twig to the female, and if she accepts it, they become a pair forever. And then they identify a nest sledge. They may even lay egg, but the fertile eggs are laid only when they're 6 to 7 years old. And they pair for life, but if one of them dies, it is replaced almost immediately. And this is how the breeding happens in the center, exactly as it happens in the wild. Both the sexes participate equally in all the activities. And we have CCTV monitors in all our aviaries, so we don't have to go near to see what they're doing. And we thought that vultures will sit and lay egg, but this female is laying egg, and it's usually at dusk and dawn. So it's all captured by CCTV cameras, which is very useful. Incubation period lasts for 55 days, and most sexes participate in incubation. And sometimes incubation shift can be of 8 to 10 hours, and then that's the time when they get really stiffened up. So then they do a vigorous exercise and keep themselves in good shape, because egg laying happens in peak winter when temperatures are very low, and you can see the egg just next to this ledge, and they don't want to leave the egg because it's so cold, and this is how they do the exercise. And when the chick hatches, it is with very sparse coat of down, and it cannot thermoregulate. So the parents sit on it. When brooding is done for 40 days, 45 days, but the feeding is done right from the same day or from the next day. And they are fed on meat, which they bring from the ground, and they store in the crop and feed it to the vulture. They regurgitate in the nest, and the chick feeds on it. And when the chick is born, chick is hatched, it's only 150 grams, but within 3 to 4 months, it becomes 5 to 6 kilos. So it requires a lot of calcium. So the parents, they bring big bones with them in the crop, and then they regurgitate and the chick feeds on it. In fact, both the birds are there on the nest, and as the food comes out, one bird seems to regulate the source of the morsel. Maybe they are scared that the chick will get choked or something, and they actually bring long bones, more than 6 to 7 inches. This bird will take out a bone which is big, and this chick will swallow it. And calcium is extremely important. If they don't get enough calcium, they can have rickets or the metabolic bone disease, and then you cannot really save them. So we leave the carcasses, we give them the food and leave the carcass for 10-15 days for them to feed on the bones, and that's very important. See how this is taking out the bone, and this chick will feed on it. See, the size of the bone comes out, and chicks just takes it. So now we have good number of birds. We have over 700 birds in our facilities, and most of the birds are at Pinjore, Paksa, and Rani, which are managed by Bombay Nature Society. And Pinjore, it is largely because we do double clutching and artificial incubation, and we have bred more than 450 birds now from different centers. And we also do artificial incubation and double clutching, because vultures give only one egg per year, and only 50% of them reach to adulthood. So what we do, if vultures give one egg, but if the egg is lost for certain reason, it lays again within 3 weeks. So what we do, we take advantage of that. We take the egg when it is a week old and then incubate it artificially. So we have incubators in thermocontrol room where we can put 4 eggs in one incubator, and we incubate them at 36.6 to 36.9 degrees. And we also candle them to monitor the growth of embryo. We do it every 6 days, and we also weigh them every 3 days, because we know that an egg to hatch successfully should lose for between 14 to 17% of the water, because metabolic water escapes through the pores. And till about 40 days, you don't know exactly whether egg is is live or dead or not. But after 40 days, if you keep the egg on a firm surface, it will start twitching. Then you know there's life, and then there's excitement, And then at 50 days, it starts calling from inside. We call it internal wave. 53 days, usually it cracks, and by 55 days, it hatches. So when it cracks, we put it into the hatches. Because all our eggs are laid together, we have number of eggs in the hatches where humidity is very high. And this is how a chick is born, with very sparse coat of down. And then third day onwards, we start feeding them on all kinds of food from the very different organs. And we keep a very close eye on the weight gain. For first 5 days, we don't let the weight gain by more than 7%. From third day to 20th day, not more than 9%, and so on. That we have a calculation. And if we can do that, the chick fledges successfully. Because you can overfeed a chick and kill it, but you have to regulate and then do it. For 9 days, the eyesights are not well developed, so we feed it. And after that, we are very careful not to imprint the chicks, so we have very minimal human interaction. But after 3 days, you need to keep the chicks in the sun and to get vitamin D3. And if they don't get vitamin D3, they will not be able to assimilate calcium. So if we do that, if after 3 days we keep them for half an hour, and then the egg goes up. And then finally we keep them out in the sun for most of the day. And when the chick is about 10 to 15 days old, and by the time the parents have laid again, so we give the chick back to the parents and take the second egg, and that we incubate ourselves. And that's how hatchability increases. And vultures have very little olfactory sense, so you can foster real chicks also, and give it to the pair which is good at breeding, and take the egg. But we have to take all precautions, and this is how we develop the chicks. When the chicks are about 3 months old, then we mark them. We put a ring, and they are always kept together. So once they are 4 months old, we keep them in holding aviaries. And you see, this chick is parent reared, and this chick is hand reared, but there's absolutely no difference, and they behave exactly the same. So we are very happy that this is what is happening. So now, because of the ban on diclofenac, its usage has come down. It is less than 2% or even less than that. And we have very successful conservation breeding program, and multi-dose vials of diclofenac has banned. So now we have thought of releasing the vultures in the wild. And so, our facilities are off display, but once we think of releasing birds in the wild, we invited public figures like the Chief Minister of Haryana to release birds in pre-release aviary. We are going to do a soft release. We'll put the birds in pre-release when they get used to the surroundings, and then only attract free-ranging birds, and then only they will release them in the wild. So our birds will join the free-ranging birds, and then they will be more successful in the wild. And this is how we are attracting the free-ranging birds. And in the cage, we have the captive bred birds. So there is a lot of interaction, and once there's a lot of interaction, they will release them. So on 3rd of June 2006, we invited the Union Minister and the Chief Minister to open the aviary. But that time we released only Himalayan griffon, because although we knew that we release our birds, they will be able to fly, but there was proper apprehension among people that birds kept in captivity for long years, they would not be able to fly. So what we did, we had 2 Himalayan griffons with us for 10 years. So we released them first to see what really happens. And we were very happy with the results. So Himalayan griffons, when we opened the gates, when the minister opened the gates, they didn't go out for 48 hours, 24 hours, sorry. And then they went out the aviary, and you will see how professionally they went. They didn't collide anywhere. They just flew away, and we were very happy. And then we would feed them close to the center, and these birds will feed with the wild birds. This whiteback is a wild bird, and this is a Himalayan griffon, is a captive bird, which we have. It's a bird which we have released. And then within a month, it started flying, and we were very happy. So now we know that we can reintroduce birds which are kept in captivity. So we have started reintroduction of our critically endangered white-backed vulture. So we have released 8 vultures in the wild, 4 with GPS tag, and 4 with EOBS GSM tags. And we released the birds on 8th of October. And the birds, and we called the minister who remotely opened the gate. And the birds didn't, none of the birds flew away for 48 hours. And they took almost 10 days for all of them to go out. And they gradually went out, and they also joined a wild flock of vultures. They started finding their own food, and they are now in different locations. We have lost three birds. But two of them went very high up in Himachal, and they could not find food and they died. But rest of the birds are doing fine, and we are monitoring them continuously. And we also, because we know where they are, because we have GPS, we have tags on them. So we periodically go and see if they are fed or not. If they are not fed, we provision them food and make sure that they survive. And good thing is that three of the birds have started nesting. They nested last year in December, although nesting was not successful, disturbed by the monkeys, but they started nesting. And this is what really we want. And once we have offspring, those offspring will be really wild, and then we will have no problems. And we have also started a release program in West Bengal. But before releasing birds, we did in 100 kilometers radius, we tried to find out that there is a wild vulture population, there's food availability, habitat availability, and presence of other drugs is very low, and there's no other threat. And we found that during the drug survey, meloxicam, the safe drug, was becoming more popular. Diclofenac was still there, but its prevalence was going down. And so we were very happy that we could release the bird. But we were worried that nimesulide, aceclofenac, which have found to be toxic now, are also their prevalence was increasing. But we are trying to see that that is also stopped. When we also did food estimation, we found there's plenty of food, very few thing. And we also called drug controller, animal husbandry directors to our center to see what efforts are being playing and trying to minimize the use of toxic drug. And we also called forest department, local government people, and the top MOEF people to see what's happening in the center. And now vulture conservation breeding plan is released by Government of India, which says all the right things, which also says we should have conservation breeding program for Egyptian vulture and king vulture. So we thank you very much. That's all I have to say. And we are not alone. We have a lot of support from Ministry of Environment, Forest, Royal Society of Protection of Bird, Diary Initiative Survival Species, International Center of Birds of Prey, Zoological Society in London, Indian Veterinary Research Institute, Wildlife Institute India, and of all forest departments. So thank you so much. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing overview of the facility and the kind of initiatives that are being undertaken there for the conservation and well-being of vultures. We now move on to the question answer session for today's talk. So, Mr. Dadwal, we will take questions for your session first. So, are you with us?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So, sir, the first question for you is that which species of vultures can be observed in Himachal Pradesh?
Uh, uh, all 9 species are recorded in Himachal Pradesh, but main species which are resident here is white-rumped vulture, that is Gis bengalensis, Egyptian vulture, and Himalayan griffon and bearded vulture. These are the resident species, whereas Eurasian griffon and griffon vulture, they are winter migrant. And sometimes we have a population of red-headed vulture, Indian vulture, and slender-billed vulture as well, and mainly during winter season. Yeah.
Right, sir. And so the next question for you is that do they show site fidelities in the areas that you are monitoring? And is population census being carried out of vultures in other areas besides Kangra in Himachal Pradesh?
Can you repeat the first part of the question, please?
So the first part of the question is, do they show site fidelity in the areas where they are monitored? The vultures are being monitored in Himachal, and is population census studies being carried out of vultures in other areas besides Kangra?
Yes, we are monitoring it since year 2003-4. So main focus right now is to estimate the this breeding pairs only. But whenever our team is going in the field, they are also recording other vulture species population, mainly on the feeding points. So that we are doing. Fledgling, we are doing two kind of estimation. One is the nesting time, and then the fledgling mainly during May month, April and May. So that to see if the number of fledgling rate that we are doing in district Kangra, and sometimes not regularly, depends upon the approval from the government. We are also doing estimation of the breeding colonies in different parts, in different districts of Himachal Pradesh. But as far as district Kangra is concerned, it is an annual exercise. Not only annual exercise, it is approved government conservation program by the government of Himachal Pradesh.
Right, sir. And so the third question for you is that are the carcass dumping sites earmarked in the interface areas? I'm assuming
Yes.
that means in the areas where vultures are found.
Yes. So as I told that we are doing this estimation, annual estimation of the nesting sites. We are also doing annual estimation of the traditional cobblers. We are also mapping, dumping sites. So the mapping or dumping sites, we have done it. We need not to do it on annual basis. But if there is a new site, dumping site, then we are bringing them on the books. So they are in the record. They have been mapped with GPS locations.
Right, sir. And so the last question for you is that how receptive have local communities been to approaches such as vulture feeding points for conservation?
How? Pardon?
How receptive have local communities been to approaches such as vulture feeding points for the conservation of vultures?
I'm not getting you.
How receptive? How receptive
How
are
receptive?
how receptive have the local communities been? You mentioned the Gujars
So,
and the
yes,
others that are there.
that
Yes.
is an issue. That is an issue in Himachal as well, because local communities are not very receptive to these virtual feeding points. So we have to select such points which are far away from hamlets, so that whenever there is a carcass, there is a smell. So we have to maintain that distance from the local communities. So what we are doing now is we are getting the kind of resolution from concerned elected bodies like panchayats or societies. And once it is approved, then we are going ahead with the carcass or dumping points or feeding points. Yeah.
Right, sir. So those were the questions for you. We move on to questions for Dr. Vibhu now. So Dr. Vibhu, the first question for you is that what were the initial challenges while standardizing protocols at the Vulture Conservation Breeding Center?
Yeah, in fact, it was challenging and it was difficult, but fortunately, we did help when we start. One thing was I was studying vultures in the wild and also the breeding and all. And when we started this conservation program, everything was very different. But fortunately, we had support from the CZA and also from UK. We have support from National Birds of Prey Center in UK, and they have kept vultures, they have bred them and housed them and all. So we learned from them and also from conservation of Californian condor in US. So they have a manual and also we followed that. But every year we have to refine and do it according to our needs and according to our program. But every day was a learning, but we documented everything. Like when we designed the aviaries, we had not put bamboos and the vultures would hit the wires and all and then go hurt. So then we decided having bamboos or we also had a bee attack, of rock bee attack on our vultures. And in wild, I have always seen big hives of bees under the nest. And I thought there is a commensal relationship. And there were beehives close to the site also, but we never bothered to remove them. But once a honey buzzard plucked the hive and flew over our aviary, and most of the vultures were badly stuck, and unfortunately we lost three of them. So it's a continuous learning exercise. But now I think we know how to breed them and also do the artificial incubation.
Right, sir. And so the next question for you is that can you elaborate more on the running tail disease that you've mentioned before, that you mentioned while you are doing for quarantining birds?
See, the Ranai disease or the Newcastle disease is the most prevalent disease in birds in our country. We get in poultry and all. But Ranai disease, the incubation period is about 45 days. That's what I've learned from the veterinarian. And so we keep our birds for 45 days in quarantine, because if other diseases are also there, but they have shorter quarantine. If they have shorter incubation period. So if vultures harbor any of these disease, in 45 days, these diseases will appear in the vulture. So we'll know that is the problem. And then we will treat it and then only bring it to the center. Otherwise, we don't want to have disease in our center. Well, we try to spot it. Touch wood. Yeah.
Right, sir. And so the last question for you is that are there plans to release more vultures into the wild in the near future?
Oh yes, that's the objective of the our center, and only problem is the drugs which are still there in the system. But we have started releasing birds in the wild to see how they do. So if there is no mortality in the birds which we have released for another 2 years, especially drug-related mortality, we expect mortality only 30, 40, 50%. But for other causes, it will be acceptable. But if it due to drug-related causes, then we will not stop releasing, and we will try to work on that. The drugs are removed from the system. But we do have to release, and we have started releasing from Pinjore and also from Rajabhat Khawa in West Bengal.
Right, sir. So those were the questions for you. And with this, we come to the end for our 73rd Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk. On behalf of the Central Zoo Authority, I would like to thank both Mr. Dadwal and to you, Dr. Vibhu, for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us for this talk. I would also like to thank the audience who have been with us, and I hope you about the vultures as well as the Vulture Conservation Breeding Center that has been established in Pinjore for its conservation. And would also like to inform you that we will be doing the next talk, which will be on next Wednesday on which will be a week 74th talk on the leopard, and the zoo and focus will be Lion Breeding Center and multiple safari parks at Ottawa. So do tune in for that talk next Wednesday from 4 to 5 p.m. That's our second last talk before the conclusion of the 75-week series. So once again, thank you so much for joining in. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.